Hey everyone, and welcome to the channel. In this chapter, we're going to explore the exciting world of CSS text styling. Text is the backbone of any website, and mastering how to style it is essential for creating visually appealing and user-friendly designs. We'll cover all the key CSS properties you need to know, from choosing the right fonts and sizes to fine-tuning spacing and adding decorative touches. Alright, let's get our project set up. You'll need the source code for this lesson, and you can find the link in the description of the 02 CSS selectors video. It's labeled source code. Click the link to download the zipped folder to your desktop. Once the download is complete, a zip file will be saved to your computer. It may be located on your desktop or in your downloads folder. If it's not on your desktop, you can move it there by right-clicking the file, selecting Cut, navigating to your desktop, right-clicking on the desktop, and selecting Paste. The downloaded file name might include a download code or other extra characters. Right-click the zip file, select Rename, and change the name to CSS Course. To extract the contents of the zip file, right-click on it and select Extract All. The file will extract it into desktop. Now, you'll have a regular folder, called CSS Course. You can delete the original zip file to save space. Open Visual Studio Code. Then, open the extracted folder, CSS Course, in VS Code. Inside, you'll see I've already cleaned things up and renamed the folders and files to match our lesson titles. This makes it easier to follow along. Now, navigate to the 03 lesson folder. This is where we'll be working today. Inside, you'll see a file named index.html. Right-click on index.html and rename it to css-text-styling.html. This file will hold the structure of our web page. We also need a separate CSS file. Right-click in the 03 lesson folder again and select New File. Name this file styles03.css. This is where we'll write all our CSS code to style the text. Make sure you have both of these files open in VS Code. We'll be using them throughout this video. Now that you have your HTML and CSS files ready, let's set up the basic HTML structure. Open your CSS-text-styling.html file in a code editor. Inside this file, type exclamation point and press Tab or Enter. Depending on your editor, this should trigger an emit abbreviation expansion, creating the basic HTML boilerplate. Within the head section of the HTML document, you'll find a title tag. Change the text between the title tags to styling text. Still within the head section, below the title tag. Add a link tag to connect your HTML to your CSS file. The link tag should look like this. Link rel equals stylesheetref equals styles-03.css. Alright, we've got a fresh HTML file ready to go. Let's add some text content to get started. We'll use headings and paragraphs, the core text elements in HTML. And I'll just paste it here. Okay. We've added our headings and paragraphs. Now, let's see how it looks in a web browser. To see the effect of these changes immediately, let's arrange our browser and text editor side by side. This way, we can watch how our CSS affects the text in real time. And I will add more H2 headings below the H1 heading. Notice how the headings are bigger and bolder than the paragraphs. This is partly due to something called font weight. Font weight is essentially the thickness of the text. It's often represented by numbers, although you'll also see keywords like normal and bold. Headings, by default, are usually set to bold, which often equates to a font weight of 700. Paragraphs, on the other hand, are typically normal, which corresponds to a font weight of 400. This difference in font weight, combined with the size difference, creates that clear visual hierarchy. We can change these default styles using CSS. One way to do this is with the font property, specifically font weight. In CSS, we'll change the font weight of the H2 headings to 400. Watch how the thickness of the H2 headings changes. They now have the same thickness as the paragraph text, creating a more consistent visual appearance. What if I change this paragraph's font weight to 700? Now, the paragraph text becomes bolder, and it's no longer the same thickness as the H2 headings. This demonstrates how font weight controls the visual weight of the text and how it affects the overall balance of the page. The key is you can use values from 100 to 900, in increments of 100, as well as keywords like normal, bold, bolder, and lighter, to fine-tune the weight of your text. Experiment with these values to find the right balance for your design. We've seen how font weight controls the thickness of the text. Now, let's talk about font size, which controls the size of the text. We'll use rem units to control the size of our H2 heading. First, let's set a base font size on the HTML element. This will be our foundation for all our rem-based font sizes. We'll set it to 16px, which is a common default. Now, let's set the font size of our H2 using rem units. This demonstrates how rem units work. They're always relative to the HTML element's font size. This makes scaling very consistent. If we change the HTML's font size, all the rem-based sizes will change proportionally. Let's say we change the HTML's font size to 20px. See how the H2 heading is now larger? It's 2 rem, which means 2 times the root font size. Since our root font size is 16px, the H2 is now 2 multiplied by 20px equal 40px. This consistent scaling is why rem units are generally preferred for font sizing. They make your CSS much more maintainable. We'll start by looking at M units, which are relative to the parent element's font size. This can be very useful for scaling related text elements within a section, like a header. We'll place a heading and a paragraph inside the header element. Now, let's add some CSS to style this header using M units. See how the different elements within the header are sized relative to the header's base font size? The H1 is 2M, so it's twice the size of the header's font size. The H2 is 1.5M, and so on. Notice how all the text within the header has scaled proportionally? This is the power of M units. They allow you to easily scale related text elements within a section. This is particularly useful for things like navigation menus, where you want all the links and headings to scale together. However, remember that M units are relative to the immediate parent. So, if the header itself was nested within another element that also had a font size set, the calculations could become more complex. For global font sizing, rem units, which are relative to the root element, are generally a better choice to avoid these cascading issues. But for scaling within a component, like this header, M units can be very effective. So, we've seen how M units allow us to scale text effectively within a component, like this header. Now, let's talk about another unit. Pixels, or px, are absolute units. Font size, 20px, will always render the text at 20 pixels, regardless of the font size of the parent element or the root element. Pixels are useful for very specific situations where you need precise control and you don't want the text to scale. You might use pixels for very small captions, labels, or other fixed-size elements where consistent sizing is more important than responsiveness. For example, let's add a footer element to our HTML page. And we styled the copyright class, setting the font size to 12px. In this example, the copyright notice is set to 12px. Even if we change the base font size of the HTML or the header, this copyright notice will always be 12px. This is the key difference between px and relative units like M and rem. Pixels give you absolute control, but they sacrifice scalability. Because pixel-based text doesn't scale, it can create accessibility issues for users who have vision impairments and rely on their browser's zoom or font size settings to make text larger. For this reason, it's generally best to avoid using px for the main text content of your website. Relative units like rem are almost always a better choice for ensuring your website is accessible to everyone. So, to summarize, rem, used for most font sizing needs, provides consistent scaling relative to the root element. M, used for scaling within components or sections of text. Be mindful of potential cascading issues. Px, used sparingly, primarily for things that should not scale, like small captions or fixed-size elements. Avoid for most text content due to accessibility concerns. Now that we've explored font size, let's move on to another essential font property, font family. Font family allows you to specify the typeface, or font, that you want to use for your text. Browsers have a default font that they use, but you'll often want to choose different fonts to match your website's design and branding. Here's how you can use font family. We'll set the font family for the .header H1 to serif, the .header H2 to sans serif, and the .header P to monospace. As you can see, we specify the font family followed by a list of font names. The browser will try to use the first font in the list. If that font isn't available, for example, if the user doesn't have it installed on their computer, it will try the next font in the list, and so on. It's important to include a fallback font at the end of your list. This is usually a generic font family like serif, sans serif, or monospace. This ensures that the text will still be readable even if none of the specific fonts you listed are available. Let's break down the generic font families. Serifs are decorative strokes at the ends of letters. Serif fonts are often used for body text because they're considered more readable for large blocks of text. Times New Roman is a classic example of a serif font. Sans serif fonts don't have those decorative strokes. They're often used for headings and other display text because they tend to look cleaner and more modern. Arial is a common sans serif font. Monospace fonts have the same width for every character. They're often used for code or when you need characters to line up vertically. Courier New is a well-known monospace font. You can use any font that's installed on the user's computer, but the problem is you can't guarantee that everyone will have the same fonts installed. That's why web fonts are so important. Web fonts allow us to include the font files directly on our website, so the browser can download them and use them to display our text, regardless of what fonts the user has installed. This gives us much greater control over our typography and ensures a consistent visual experience for all visitors. There are several ways to use web fonts. One common method is to use a service like Google Fonts. Google Fonts hosts a vast library of free, high-quality fonts that you can easily integrate into your website. To get a font from Google Fonts, start by go to Google Fonts, visit fonts.google.com. Search for Roboto, type Roboto in the search bar. Select Roboto, click on the Roboto font family. Choose styles, select the styles you need, e.g., regular 400, bold 700. Click the plus select this style button for each. Copy the code, a panel will appear at the bottom. Open it. Copy the link tag provided. Paste into HTML. Paste the copied link tag into the head section of your HTML document. Apply in CSS. In your CSS, use font family, Roboto, sans serif, to apply the font to your desired elements. Because we've linked to the font file on Google Fonts, the browser will automatically download the Roboto font and use it to display our text. This ensures that everyone sees the correct font, regardless of whether they have it installed on their computer. Web fonts are key for consistent branding and a polished look. They give you control over your typography, making your website look great for everyone. Okay, continuing directly from that excellent introduction to font style. Sometimes, we want to add emphasis to certain words or phrases, or perhaps use a slightly different style for specific text elements. The font style property allows us to do just that by making text italic or oblique. There are three main values for font style. Normal, this is the default. Text is displayed in its normal, upright style. You usually don't need to explicitly set font style, normal, unless you're overriding a previous style. Italic, this makes the text italicized. Italic text is slanted to the right. Oblique, this makes the text oblique. Oblique text is also slanted, similar to italic, but the degree of slant can vary depending on the font. Sometimes, the visual difference between italic and oblique can be subtle, and some fonts might not have a distinct oblique style at all. Okay, let's set the font style in CSS and then see how it displays in the browser. As you can see, the italic value makes the text slanted to the right, and the oblique value does something similar. Again, the exact slant of the oblique style can depend on the specific font you're using. Some fonts may not have an oblique style and will default to italic. When would you use font style? Italics are commonly used for emphasis, for foreign words, for the titles of books or other publications, and for other situations where you want to distinguish text visually. Oblique styles are less common and are sometimes used for a slightly different visual effect than italic. Often, italic is sufficient. Oblique for a font that only has an italic style, the browser will likely just display the italic version. Also, if you're using a web font, the italic and oblique styles are often separate font files. So, if you want to use italic or oblique text, make sure you've included those font styles when you import the web font. Google Fonts, for example, allows you to select the specific styles you need. Now that we've covered the fundamentals of font properties, let's talk about text color. The color property is the easiest way to style your text. It lets you change the color of your words. We're going to use simple color names to show you how it works. First, in our CSS, we see the HTML selector. We've added color, dark gray. Dark gray is a color name, just like red or blue. This line makes all the text on our page dark gray by default. Now, let's style our H2 headings. We've added color, navy. Navy is another color name, a type of dark blue. This means all H2 headings will now be navy blue. This changes the color from the default dark gray just for the headings. For our P paragraphs, we've used color, green. So, all the paragraph text will be green. Again, we're overriding the default dark gray color, but only for paragraphs. Inside the header part of our page, we have color, black, for the header CSS rule. This sets the default text color inside the header to black. We're just setting a base color for the text in the header area. Let's style the main heading in the header, header H1. We've set color, red. So, the biggest heading text styling lesson inside the header will be red. So, as you can see, changing text color is as easy as using the color property and typing in basic color names like blue, red, green, black, orange, purple, gray, and dark gray. CSS lets you set a general color for the whole page, and then change colors for specific parts, giving you control over how your text looks. Alright, let's move on to text decoration. We're going to use the text decoration property to add some lines to our text. We'll be focusing on text decoration line to keep it simple. This property lets us put lines under, over, or through our text. First, look at the H2 selector. We've added text decoration line, underline. This is going to underline all of our H2 headings. You'll see a line appear right below the text of the font weight headings on our page. Now, let's look at header H1. We've added text decoration line, over line. This will put a line above the main heading, text styling lesson, in our header. It's a line right over the top of the text. Finally, let's style the links in our footer. We're using footer PA to target the link elements that are inside P paragraphs, which are inside the footer. We've added text decoration line, none. This is important. By default, web browsers underline links. But with text decoration line, none, we can remove those underlines from the links in our footer, giving them a cleaner look if we want. So, you can see how text decoration line works. We used underline for H2 headings, overline for the main header heading, line through for header paragraphs, and none to remove underlines from footer links. This property is a fun way to add visual interest or change the default look of text elements on your web page. Next up, let's talk about text transformation. The text transform property lets us change the capitalization of our text, making it all uppercase, all lowercase, or capitalizing the first letter of each word. Let's see how we can use it. First, look at the header H1 rule. We've added text transform, uppercase. This is going to transform the text in our main heading, text styling lesson, to be all uppercase letters. Even if we wrote it in lowercase in our HTML, CSS will make it uppercase on the web page. Now, let's look at header H2. We've added text transform, lowercase. This will transform the font weight subheading in the header to be all lowercase letters. Again, CSS is changing how it looks on the page, no matter how we typed it in our HTML. For header P, styling the paragraphs inside the header, we've used text transform, capitalize. This is a really useful one. Capitalize will capitalize the first letter of each word in the paragraph text within the header. This can be great for making certain text stand out or for stylistic reasons. There are other options for text transform too, like text transform, none, which just means no transformation, it keeps the text as it is. And there's also text transform, full width, which is a bit more advanced and used for special character formatting. But for now, the most common and useful values are uppercase, lowercase, and capitalize. So, with text transform, you can easily change the capitalization of your text using uppercase, lowercase, and capitalize. It's a handy way to quickly adjust the look of your text without having to retype anything in your HTML. It's great for headings, menu items, or anywhere you want to consistently control the case of your text. Let's move on to text indentation. This property is all about creating that classic paragraph look where the first line of text is slightly indented, or pushed in from the left edge. In CSS, we use the text indent property to achieve this. It's really simple to use. Take a look at our CSS code again. We're going to style the paragraphs inside the header, that's our header P rule. We've added text indent, 2M. See what happened to the paragraph text in the header? The first line is now indented. Text indent does exactly that, it indents the very first line of text within an element. You can also use other units for text indent, like pixels, px, if you want a fixed indent size. But M is often preferred for text indentation because it scales nicely with the text size. So, text indent is a really easy way to create that classic paragraph indent on the first line of your text. Just use text indent and a unit like M, and you can instantly improve the readability and visual structure of your paragraphs, especially for longer blocks of text. Now, let's talk about text alignment. The text align property controls how your text lines up horizontally within its box. Think of it like choosing whether your text should be lined up on the left, right, centered, or spread out evenly. Let's see how it works in our CSS. First, look at the H2 rule. We've added text align, center. This is going to center all of our H2 headings. You'll see the font weight headings jump to the middle of their lines on the page. Next, let's look at header H1. We've added text align, right. This will right align the main heading, text styling lesson, inside our header. It will move all the way over to the right side of the header area. For header H2, which styles the subheadings inside the header, we've used text align, left. Now, left alignment is actually the default for text, so you might not see a big change here at first. But we've explicitly set it to left to be clear. The font weight subheadings inside the header will be aligned to the left. For header P, styling the paragraphs inside the header, we've used text align, justify. Remember we talked about justify before? This will stretch out the lines of text in the header paragraphs so that they fill the entire width, creating even left and right edges. It gives a more formal, blocky look to the text. Finally, look at the .copyright class. We've added text-align, center, here. This will center any text with the copyright style, like our copyright notice in the footer. It will appear nicely centered in the footer area. So, those are the main values for text-align, left, right, center, and justify. Left aligns text to the left, right to the right, center to the center, and justify stretches the text to fill the line. You can use text-align to control the horizontal positioning of your text and create different layouts and visual styles. Now, let's talk about letter and word spacing. CSS lets you control the space between letters and the space between words in your text. This can be useful for subtle adjustments to readability or for creating specific visual effects. We'll look at two properties, letter spacing and word spacing. First, let's look at letter spacing. In our CSS, we've added letter spacing 0.2 em to the header h1 rule. This property, as you might guess, controls the space between individual letters. We've used a value of 0.2 em. Let's see what that does to our main heading, Text Styling Lesson, in the header. See how the letters in Text Styling Lesson are now a bit more spread out? That's letter spacing in action. A positive value like 0.2 em increases the space between letters. You can use smaller or larger values to fine-tune this spacing. Sometimes a little bit of letter spacing can make headings look more elegant or airy. Next, let's look at word spacing. In the header h2 rule, we've added word spacing 0.5 em. This property, as you can guess, controls the space between words. We've used 0.5 em here. Let's see how this affects our font weight subheading in the header. Notice how the space between the word's font and weight in the subheading is now wider? That's word spacing at work. A value like 0.5 em increases the space between words. You can use this to adjust the readability of your text, especially if you're using a font that has words that are a bit too close together by default. Just like with text indent, we're using em units here for letter spacing and word spacing. You can also use other units like pixels. And you can even use negative values to decrease the spacing, making letters or words closer together, but be careful not to make your text too cramped and hard to read. For now, positive values are the most common use for these properties. So, letter spacing and word spacing give you control over the gaps between letters and words in your text. They're useful for making subtle adjustments to improve readability or to create specific visual styles, especially for headings and shorter lines of text. Let's move on to line height. The line height property controls the vertical space between lines of text. Think about how much space there is between each line in a paragraph. Line height lets you adjust that, and it has a big impact on how readable your text is. Let's see how it works. In our CSS, we're going to style the P paragraphs, that's our P rule. We've added line height, too. Notice what happens to the paragraphs on the web page. See how the lines of text are now spaced further apart? That's because we've increased the line height. Here, we've used a value of just 2 for line height. When you use a number without any units for line height, it's multiplied by the font size of the text. So, if our paragraph text has a font size of, say, 16 pixels, then line height, 2, makes the line height 32 pixels. Using unitless numbers for line height is very common and often recommended because it scales nicely with the font size. You can also use other units for line height, like px or ems, if you want to set a specific line height in those units. But using a unitless number is often the easiest and most flexible way to control line height. Why is line height important? Well, it greatly affects how readable your text is, especially for longer paragraphs. If the lines are too close together, text can look cramped and be hard to read. Increasing the line height adds more breathing room between the lines, making the text more comfortable to read, especially for blocks of text. Experiment with different line height values to see what looks best for your text and your chosen font. A line height between 1.4 and 1.6 is often a good starting point for body text, but you can adjust it based on your design and font. So, line height is your tool for controlling the vertical spacing between lines of text. By adjusting line height, you can significantly improve the readability and visual appeal of your paragraphs and other text elements. Alright, that brings us to the end of our lesson on basic CSS text styling. We've covered quite a few important properties in this chapter, but remember, CSS text styling goes much deeper. There are many more advanced text properties and techniques to explore. In future lessons, we'll dive into more complex concepts and discover even more ways to style your text and create sophisticated typography on your web pages. We'll explore things like advanced color techniques, more intricate text effects, and how text properties interact with other CSS features. For now, experiment with these basic text properties, practice using them in your own projects, and get comfortable with how they work. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video where we'll continue our CSS journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more web development tutorials.